Thank you, Mia Carol. Good morning and welcome here at the UU Fellowship. Sharing this beautiful day together with music, statements of commitment, expressions of caring, and ideas which challenge. These represent our community's ideals. We especially welcome visitors, those who have joined us for the first time today, or those who have been away for a period. It is our custom to ask that if you are willing, you stand, if able, introduce yourself, tell us where you are from and how you came to join us today. Are there people to fall into those categories?
When he worked at Lawrence University, and I ran the Study Skills Center, and I'm going to Bjorklund this week. My name is Ronna Swift. I'm from Appleton Fellowship, which is thriving. And I spend the week with Terry Moran and talk politics.
Any others, please?
Good morning. I'm Mary Jo Urban, and I am happy to be here from the Manitowoc UU Fellowship. And I have my family with me, Grace, Lauren, Lisa, and Bonnie.
Welcome. Others?
One more.
Yes. Oh, certainly.
Craig Carrier. I'm from Bailey's Harbor, Utrecht, Gibraltar, and I'm accompanying my daughter, Cora.
And Cora will be providing our special music this morning. I have to be truthful, according to those descriptions that I gave you, that both today's speaker and I do fit the description of a lengthy absence. And we apologize for that, but it's unavoidable. Estella has spoken here often in the past with very thoughtful messages. Her background information is on your order of service. I could tell you lots more good things about her, but that would take at least until Wednesday, so I'll forego. I'm Chuck Lauder, and I'm delighted to be service leader again, especially when my wife is the speaker. We have both been members of this fellowship for 20 years. Announcements bespeak the vitality of our community together. If you have items to share, please stand and Carl will bring you a mic to present them. Announcements? Yes.
Hi, I'm Mark Richards. I just wanted to start speaking early about an event that's coming up at the end of September. We're going to do a climate change revival, climate justice revival. Here, there'll be Saturday afternoon events, special Sunday morning worship. This is in conjunction with over 300 congregations across the nation doing a UU climate justice revival. Looking for folks who want to support that, volunteer to help me and do stuff like that. Just reach out. I'd appreciate it.
Good morning, this is Anna Knapp. I recently had the pleasure of attending a great exhibit at the Neville Museum. So if you find yourself in Green Bay, do check out their Trans Experience, which is a special exhibit that's only there, I think, till August 13th. But then until November is the Telling Our Stories, the LGBTQ plus exhibit that talks about the history of that topic in our area. So do check it out.
Other announcements. Normally, we don't have special music, but we are honored this morning to have some lovely special music. It's performed by Cora Carreri, a recent graduate of Gibraltar High School, who has received the Miller Scholarship for 4 years of flute study and performance at the University of Minnesota. She will also perform the music for the offertory this morning. Cora? Thank you, Cora, for that delightful addition to our service this morning. For opening words, we turn to Frederick Douglass, who wrote The Nation's Problem in the 19th century, but it is just as relevant today. Our past was slavery. We must not refer to it with any sense of complacency or composure. The history of it is a record of stripes, a revelation of agony. It is written in characters of blood. Its breath is a sigh, its voice a groan, and we turn from it with a shudder. The duty of today is to meet the questions that confront us with intelligence and courage in the flame of our chalice. Please stand as you are able to sing hymn 147 and remain standing for the unison affirmation and the doxology. We gather together to seek knowledge and wisdom, to explore freely the vast reaches of mind and spirit, to celebrate within the caring community those truths, ancient and modern, which give meaning and direction to our lives. In every land, by every tongue. Please be seated. Sharing joys and concerns allows us to celebrate with you the delights you are experiencing or to carry some of your burdens. If there are joys and concerns to share, Carl will bring the mic. Since the service is broadcast, please do not share information about another person without permission.
So I have Barb's full permission to do this. Barb Sina was the rector at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Sister Bay for many years, beloved by everybody who knew her, a wise counselor. And on Friday, there were a number of UUers as well as St. Luke's people at a celebration at St. Luke's, and Barb was there. What happened to her a number of weeks ago was she had what, quote unquote, was a mild stroke. I think a not mild stroke may be death, because this mild stroke feels like more than mild to me. She's has vision problems, so she can no longer read, but it should improve. And her left side is very weak, so she's been in occupational therapy for these past weeks. She is suddenly leaving her rented home in Bailey's Harbor and moving to Upper New York State to be with her one daughter and that daughter's husband while she recovers further. And then her plans are to go to live with her other daughter in Madison, where she'll be closer to most of her friends. So Sarah did just a magnificent job of sending out notices about the service and about Barb. And I have Barb's address in Upper New York State. She has gone from being actively involved to being very limited in what she can do. So if you see the address and if you know Barb, she would just love to be in connection with you. And she expects a full recovery, which we all hope for, and is a good attitude. And before I read what she wanted us to read to you this morning, I just want to say that when I was talking to her on the phone, she said, you know, we all wake up Monday morning and we expect Tuesday morning to be the same. Don't we though? Yeah, yeah. So this is what Barb asked Dick and me to share with you. Hi, Dick and Mary. Would you please give my heartfelt thanks to everyone for attending the party and for the cards and notes and words of support, encouragement and love. I am more grateful than words can express.
If I may piggyback on that, at the open house on Friday, someone commented that there were probably more UUs there than there were Episcopalians. Yeah. And at one point, I said to Barbara, you know what? I think you're a closet UU. And she didn't disagree with me. Any other joys and concerns? We'll then proceed to the offertory. The offering allows you to generously support the ongoing work and activities of the fellowship, and it will be accompanied once again by Cora. Our moment of quiet provides the opportunity to reflect on what we've heard and spoken this morning, and also to clear our minds for new ideas to enter. Estella will now present the reading and the message.
Tell me if this is the right level, okay? The reading comes from Clint Smith, this wonderful book, How the Word is Passed, which I highly recommend. The history of slavery is the history of the United States. It was not peripheral to our founding, it was central to it. It is not irrelevant to our contemporary society. It created it. The history is in our soil. It is in our policies, and it must too be in our memories. In order for our country to collectively move forward, it is not enough to have a patchwork of places that are honest, surrounded by other spaces that undermine it. It must be a collective endeavor to learn and confront the story of slavery and how it has shaped the world we live in today. Well, good morning. I am so glad to be home for the summer and the early fall. This message comes from my well-known preoccupation with social justice, but my source this time is a young Black man. I usually talk about women when I have spoken here. Clint Smith, a poet, a journalist, a teacher. And you have a handout in your program that describes the chapters of his book, How the Word is Passed. I think the UU Book Club has read it, and so there may be others in the room who can serve as resources for further discussion. Smith's book was chosen by a UU committee that we joined in Ames, Iowa last year. And it served as the basis for a Sunday service there in February. And then Chuck volunteered me to bring it from Ames to Ephraim. I really continued all the way through the spring to mine the book. And the more I read it, the more compelling I found it. In a nutshell, I'll tell you why, with the caveat that I'm still exploring these ideas. I don't mean this to be a lecture in any sense of the word. And I really strongly welcome discussion with you on any of the points after the service. First, from the reading, I think you can see that Smith believes the political and social health of our nation really depends on our national willingness and our ability to tell a truthful story about the history and effects of slavery in the U.S., to reckon with the facts of slavery truthfully, because it is uniquely our story. Whether or not our ancestors were slaveholders or slaves or abolitionists or onlookers from afar, slavery has affected everything. Our economic strength, our position in the world, our institutions, our laws, the structure of our cities, our music, our prejudices, and more. Second, although Smith does not construct a national story for us in this book, he really provides many of the pieces we would need to do so. And of course, I can't resist. Those pieces come from guides whose life work is done at the public memorials that he visited, the people that he interviewed at those sites, his own observations at the sites, and his research for a PhD in education from Harvard. And I'll take a crack at outlining those pieces and how they might go together in just a minute. Third, the book draws attention to the fatal flaw in the system of slavery that we developed. I see that fatal flaw as the category of race by which it was justified. And that category has no scientific validity. So much for my nutshell. The need for a truthful story about slavery comes out in every chapter of the book, but it's most blatant in the one that presents the Louisiana Penitentiary, where inmates' life expectancy is actually less than it was during slavery. Throughout the nation, our prison system still uses the free labor of inmates who are disproportionately Black. The need is underlined in a chapter on Blandford Cemetery in Virginia, where the sons of Confederate soldiers have an annual ceremony to honor Confederate Civil War heroes and to tell the story that they died for a noble cause: defense of their homeland, defense of their families. Nothing is said about slavery, and the Confederate flag is larger than the American flag. The need for a truthful story is reiterated by participants in Galveston's Juneteenth celebration. One organizer said, when Clint Smith was there, "It is not a Black thing. It is an American thing, Juneteenth." It's about freedom at the most basic and most universal level. The main reenactor in the Juneteenth ceremony says, "All slaves are free" has got to be the most powerful 4 words in history. And I would say our Civil War set a standard for people across the world. So we really need to make sure that our story is true. As I piece it together from Smith's interviews and research and observations, a truthful story would state that American slavery had a 250-year history, extending roughly from 1619 until 1865, when the Civil War ended. It really began when the first laws were passed about the treatment of slaves. And they were passed very, very quickly after people came. Initially, it included, the slavery included indentured servants, and it also included American Indians, in addition to Africans. But as trade routes for various products were established and more bodies were needed to work on larger plantations, the African slave trade mushroomed, along with laws to cover almost every aspect of a slave's life and every challenge a master might encounter. As the guide at Jefferson's Monticello said to Smith, slavery became an institution, a system of conduct and accepted means of punishment. So chattel slavery lasted a lifetime. And it didn't matter much whether an individual master's family was kind or a farm was too small to have slaves. The system affected everyone. In the 19th century, when cotton was king, slavery became particularly cruel as families were separated more and more often in the mass migration to the states like Louisiana that needed slaves. All hands were used in the cotton fields, including those of children, as the display at the Whitney plantation in Louisiana shows. Although the slave trade was outlawed by Britain in 1803 and in the US in the 1830s, slave ships continued to arrive into the 1860s. God, I hope not the 1960s. Nor was the northern business establishment free of responsibility for continuing slavery, as the wall for which Wall Street is named testifies. By the early 1800s, because of the free labor provided by African slaves, the U.S. had become an economic giant. In his chapter on New York City, Smith states that the value of slaves exceeded the value of manufactured products and other sources of wealth. No one has yet been able to measure the monetary value of that free labor. The Civil War was decidedly not an invasion of the South by the North, as the sons of Confederate soldiers regularly claim. The South fired on Fort Sumter on April 12, 1861. Fact. No possibility of misunderstanding. This is what happened. The South fired on the fort. At first, Lincoln insisted on a military response to preserve the Union. This was, fairly close to the beginning of our country's history. And the Constitution says that what we're trying to do is to make a more perfect union. He could not possibly let states secede from the Union or states fire on other states or fire on the things that the country owned. 8 southern states seceded in April to form a Confederate government. 3 more followed in May and June, and 2 more were almost evenly split between pro-Union and pro-Confederate forces. But the declarations of secession that these states made put the preservation of slavery front and center. I was really astounded to see how obvious it is from those statements that the most important thing was to preserve slavery from their point of view. The declarations of succession really clarified the need to stop slavery from spreading west, and to stop it from really becoming the dominant economic model for the whole country if it had spread to the west. So although the abolition movement was strong, the initial rationale for war was not to eradicate slavery, Even the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 was in part a strategy for winning the war by enabling free slaves to fight for the Union. And it was a great decision because in the last years of the war, African American soldiers proved themselves to be equals in battle. It's a complicated story, and it's not going to be easy for us to resolve all of the tensions within it. The war was won by the North, but the period of Reconstruction, which was less than 20 years really, was far too short to bring about the changes that were needed for former owners and former slaves to work together politically and economically. So the promises and gains of Reconstruction for former slaves were very soon undermined by Lincoln's assassination and the new administration. When federal troops were withdrawn, plantation lands were restored to their previous owners, and they were allowed to return to state legislatures and return to federal offices. So really, everything fell apart. And in that falling apart, violence against African Americans really erupted in the South. The Ku Klux Klan began its siege of intimidation and lynching. And the loss of free labor that was the result of the war immediately translated into the creation of a sharecropping system and a prison system where inmates were literally rented out to work for farmers and manufacturers for a few cents an hour. Smith's account of public places that focus on slavery stops here for the most part at the end of Reconstruction. But I think our story, if we were to tell the full story of American slavery, would have to continue into the Jim Crow period that began in the 1880s in the South with the laws that you all know about that curtailed the movement and activities of all Black people by establishing separate spaces for them and establishing those separate spaces through the legal system. So it wasn't a matter of personal pressure. It was a matter of what was the law. This kind of physical separation based on skin color prevailed until the 1960s in both the South and the North. Still, the North seemed to offer something better, and families began to move north and west to states that had not embraced slavery or had sent soldiers to the Union Army. Wisconsin was a happy place for people to come because if you go to the top of the Capitol building, you will see a wonderful display of how we responded to the war. These people involved in the migration were often disappointed. For some, I think the Great Migration felt like jumping from the frying pan into the fire. But at least the institution of slavery was gone. So there are layers of this phenomenon that we would need to talk about in our story. From Smith's point of view, there should be one more element in our national story, and that is the damage done to African nations by slavery. And I have to admit, I had not thought about this myself, even with all of the years of reading African American literature. It had not really come up. So Smith went to Senegal because of a friendship with a professor who specialized in that nation's history, and maybe also because a teacher that he interviewed at the Juneteenth celebration in Galveston said that she thought it was really important for Black kids to know that African nations had a different history before slavery began. Smith found the same need in the students that he interviewed in Senegal. So it had affected Black students here and Black students in Senegal in the same way. The Portuguese began the slave trade there, as in most areas of Africa. And they made use of rivalries between tribes or ethnic groups to get leaders of one group to raid another group for monetary gain. And then, of course, other European nations followed suit, and African losses began to mount up. But slavery in America really depopulated several countries and upended their identity. So he is saying really that the blame should be shared. It should be shared among European and African nations and the US, but it certainly needs to be a part of our story of slavery. If we are to be honest, if we are to be truthful. Now, my title is Beyond Race, and the terrible thing from my point of view is that even with a civil war, 4 constitutional amendments, 13, 14, 15, and 24, that were supposed to take care of this, make a transition from all forms of slavery, presumably, to equality. Plus the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we have not yet rid ourselves of the idea that allowed slavery to happen as it did in the US. The idea that the color of one's skin indicated membership in a race with a capital R. And that this category of race was a reliable category of existence. And that skin color signified hierarchy. So lighter skin meant a higher degree of humanity, and darker skin meant the kind of inferiority that justified slavery. We're not rid of it yet. This idea of race now, I think, can be best understood as a mistake on the order of that made by ancestors of Europeans who thought that the earth was flat and the sun rotated around the earth. Yeah, I think it was a mistake of those proportions, just plain a mistake, not true. But it's taken us literally centuries to figure that out. Europeans were simply trying to codify differences that they had seen in their imperial voyages. They saw dark skin, they didn't have dark skin right around them, they needed to come up with some idea of what this meant, and they came up with the idea of these 4 races that had, they thought, radically different colors of skin, which is downright funny when you look around, right? You know, I think of that that critique of the weather people, the meteorologists and so on. The best thing we could do for them was to give them a Christmas present of a window so they can look out and actually see what's happening. When you think about it, you know, how did people look at the variety of skin color coming from all over the world, all the different continents, and think that it could be arranged into 4 groups? What? It just absolutely makes no sense. But anyway, the mistake is particularly important to us now because we have an election in November where voters who follow Project 2025 might vote to preserve white supremacy in the false belief that a coherent white race actually exists. Yes, it's true that group identities exist in the form of ethnicities and tribes and nations, But in reality, according to our science, people are more likely to differ as individuals than they are to conform with an overarching racial category. So Black slaves were people who were wrongly identified on the basis of skin color and other physical characteristics as part of a category that was deemed not fully human. And this still exists in the thinking of many, many of our people. In his chapter on New York City, Smith reports the view of his Nigerian American guide that racism, defined as the tendency in Western thought to make judgments of a human being based on physical traits, preceded the creation of the category we call race. The tendency to identify, say, white as good and Black as evil, and to see European skin as white, African skin as Black, when neither assessment is very astute. Look around the room. Do you have white skin? No, do I have white skin? White? No. This led all to the creation of race with a capital R as a category, a radical division of human beings. However the category developed, it proved lethal to American slaves. We can see how it worked, for instance, in Jefferson's life. He thought slavery was wrong, but he was part of a system he couldn't change. So he tried not to do the cruelest things, such as separating family members. But he did separate them when he needed money. He did not favor freeing slaves, but he did hatch a plan for, I would say, grooming some slaves for freedom. That is, taking them at birth, giving them a kind of special treatment, and then sending them to the Dominican Republic because he thought they could not successfully live as equals with whites if they were freed. In other words, he really bought the common belief that all Blacks belonged to a race, and that race was inferior to the race of whites. This is the man who wrote All Men Are Created Equal. And that doesn't, I think, undermine the good things that he did. It just means that we human beings are very complex, and probably no one is perfect or pure. So this concept of race has been proved wrong over and over again by scientists in a variety of fields. It was an attempt to codify something that really couldn't be codified on a global scale. It was part of that whole, desire to make order and sense out of the world, to impose human ideas on the world. And while it might make some sense to characterize the Inuit or the Pygmy who had kept themselves apart from other tribes or had been kept apart by their environments as a coherent group, it did not make sense to posit such coherence for all people with shades of so-called white, pink, and olive skin, or the shades of beige, brown, and so-called black skin, who lived on different continents. None of the pseudoscientific studies concerning the size of the brain or the skull panned out. None of the actual scientific studies of specific traits has reached a benchmark of 50% in any population. The Human Genome Project has put nails in the coffin of race, as European and American slave owners understood it. Now, the question is how to get rid of this powerful concept. We recognize now that it was socially constructed to justify slavery. But race has been used by ethnic groups to foster a positive identity. In the Harlem Renaissance, Negro was used to counter the N-word. In the 60s, Black Power was used to call to action as a call to action against racist policies. Black is beautiful sought to revalue dark skin. Black Lives Matter employed it to reveal a pattern in how African Americans are treated by the police. These social uses of the category for a specific purpose are fine in their way, and I wouldn't really want to undermine them. So what should we do? The rigid association of physical traits with the word race and the continuing assumption that white skin signifies superiority really need to be jettisoned. But how do we do that without undermining these other good uses that have been made, particularly in the 20th century and the 21st century? So what should we do? I mean, promoting color blindness, for instance. This has been suggested as a strategy for policy. I think Obama thought that we could be colorblind, that we were entering into a new era where colorblindness would work. But it isn't really possible, I think, for human beings to ignore color. Color is one of the signs of life that is so basic. I seriously doubt that can be done, nice as it sounds. The label people of color and the affirmative action policy have both involved increased awareness of color, and that seems to have backfired in a widespread resentment. So where do we go from here? How do we move beyond race as a way of understanding human differences? I remember a couple of years ago when a woman who held a new DEI position at Lawrence University spoke to our fellowship. And she said she wished we could all just stop using the terms Black and white to refer to people. And I wondered then, gosh, would that be possible? Could we do that? Should we simply eliminate the racial category on the census form? How might we prepare for that? And now, as a result of reading Smith's book, which is deeply concerned with education, I'm wondering, what if every elementary school curriculum contained a segment on the word race, to make known the fact that science has studied this attempt to categorize people and has found that it's not valid, just as it was not true in earlier times to say that the earth was flat or the sun revolved around the earth. We have to teach that human beings can make mistakes, right? Along with teaching the things that we want people to learn. So a teacher might say that people make their own groups all the time, but it was a mistake to think that a race could be identified from physical characteristics. And also it was a mistake to create a hierarchy of races. We would no doubt be accused of introducing critical race theory, but name-calling probably occurred when teachers began to say that the earth was almost round and revolved around its sun. Everyone makes mistakes. The problem comes when we don't correct them. I look forward to your comments in the talkback.
Thank you, Estella, for an illuminating exploration of race. Please stand as you are able to sing hymn 149. couple.
Let our rejoicing rise from the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith and the dark past. Sing a song full of the hope that has brought us. Rising sun on a new day, and the stars to praise God. Rolling tide, over the chasing rod, until the days when all on board. In the steady beat of the weary feet, come to the place which we are beside. We have found hope when the tears have been watered. We have tried in the blood of the slaughter. Our gloomy past till the night at last. Our weary years and our silent tears brought us lest our feet stray from the places of our way. Blessed us shall beneath thy hand, may we forever stand to our comfortable native land.
Please be seated. After the service, join together for coffee, tea, and conversation in the gathering room. When the chimes ring, we'll enjoy a discussion of today's topic here in the sanctuary. The closing words are a poem by Estella entitled Race with a capital R. Knows it's a little different than what's in the program because poets never consider a poem done. So this was being worked on right through last night. Race with a capital R. Let's give up that category based on physical traits that make a person part of a race, going beyond place, ethnicity, nationality, and sets a person up or down compared with members of another race. Race is a mistake made long ago, like thinking the earth is flat. When Europeans saw dark men, they elevated color to a category of human being, a division by skin. Since white meant light and goodness in code, and black meant moral darkness, all those with dark skin were suspect. And light became white, each a marker belonging to a race that transcended differences and spanned continents. When science couldn't find the proof of race in real bodies and couldn't say that one group was better than another, those who wanted the world to be ordered in opposites, white and black, good and evil, would give up neither word nor judgment. It is up to us now to let it go, to let it go, to let it go.